The bullet that killed Olivia Zimmerman's husband on their wedding night didn't just take his life, it carved out her heart and left nothing but a hollow shell wrapped in black mourning silk, standing at a graveside in Goldfield, Nevada, wondering if she'd ever feel anything again besides the burning desert wind against her tear-stained face. 6 months had passed since that October evening in 1883, when masked men burst through the door of the small cabin Thomas had built for their new life together. 6 months since she'd watched the light fade from his eyes while holding pressure against a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. 6 months since the sheriff told her there was nothing to be done, that the outlaws had vanished into the night like smoke, that justice in Nevada territory was more dream than reality. Now she stood in the general store she'd inherited from Thomas's father, mechanically measuring flour and counting coins, going through motions that felt as empty as her future. The bell above the door chimed, and Olivia didn't bother looking up from the ledger where she was recording the day's meager sales. Goldfield was barely more than a mining camp trying to become a proper town, and most days brought only a handful of customers seeking supplies before heading back to their claims in the surrounding hills. "Be with you in a moment," she said, her voice flat and professional. She'd perfected that tone over the past months, pleasant enough not to drive away business, distant enough to discourage conversation. The last thing she needed was another well-meaning neighbor asking how she was managing, their eyes full of pity she couldn't stomach. "No rush, madam. I've got time." Something in the voice made her look up. The man standing just inside the doorway was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the frame. He wore a dusty brown hat pushed back to reveal dark hair that needed cutting, and his face bore the weathered tan of someone who spent his days under the unforgiving Nevada sun. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, deep brown, steady, and completely devoid of the pity she'd grown to hate. He looked at her the way one might look at any shopkeeper, with simple courtesy and nothing more. "What can I help you with?" she asked, closing the ledger. "Need to stock up on supplies. I'll be working a claim about 10 miles northeast of here for the next few months. Figured I'd make this my regular stop if that suits you." Olivia nodded, moving behind the counter. "What do you need?" He pulled a list from his shirt pocket, and she noticed his hands calloused and strong with old scars across the knuckles. Working hands. Honest hands, if she still believed such a thing existed. Coffee, flour, beans, salt pork, matches, lamp oil, whatever you can spare. As she gathered the items, he wandered the small store, examining the shelves with genuine interest. Most miners came in, grabbed what they needed, and left. This one seemed to be taking stock of everything she carried, noting the careful organization, the clean floors, the way she'd arranged things for easy access. "You keep a good store," he said as she wrapped the salt pork in brown paper. "My name's Lucas Quinn, by the way. Seems proper to introduce myself if I'll be coming by regular. Olivia Zimmerman." She tied string around the package with practiced efficiency. "That'll be $4.30. He counted out the money carefully, placing each coin on the counter. "You run this place alone?" "I do." She swept the coins into her palm and deposited them in the cash box, then began loading his supplies into a wooden crate. "Must be hard work for one person." "I manage." Her tone didn't invite further discussion, but he didn't seem offended. He simply nodded, lifted the crate as though it weighed nothing, and headed for the door. "I'll be back in 2 weeks, Mrs. Zimmerman." "Much obliged." The bell chimed his departure, and Olivia returned to her ledger, trying to ignore the strange feeling his visit had left behind. It wasn't interest exactly, more like a small crack in the numbness that had become her constant companion. She didn't want cracks. Cracks let things in: feelings, hopes, possibilities, and she was done with all of that. Her story was over. She'd had her chance at happiness, brief as it was, and now she was simply existing, running a store in a dusty Nevada town until time finally decided to release her from the obligation of drawing breath. 2 weeks later, Lucas Quinn returned, exactly as promised. The bell chimed just after noon, and he walked in with the same steady confidence, his hat dusty from the trail. This time, Olivia was ready with his order, having kept track of what he'd purchased and anticipated his needs. "Efficient service," he observed, examining the supplies she'd laid out. "You remembered what I bought. It's good business to know your customers' needs." "That's true enough." He paused, then added, "I'll need a new pick handle too. Mine cracked yesterday." She retrieved one from the back room, and as she handed it to him, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact was so sudden, so unexpected in its ordinariness, that she pulled back as though burned. "Sorry," Lucas said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what he was apologizing for. "I don't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't." The lie came easily. Everything made her uncomfortable now: human contact, kindness, the assumption that life could somehow continue as normal. But she couldn't say that to a customer, so she tallied his bill and accepted his payment with mechanical precision. This time, however, he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he stood by the counter, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I hope you don't think me forward, but I heard about what happened to your husband. I'm sorry for your loss." Olivia's hand stilled over the cash box. Here it came: the pity, the sympathy, the inevitable suggestion that time heals all wounds and she should try to move forward with her life. She braced herself for platitudes she didn't want to hear, but Lucas simply picked up his crate and added, "Loss like that doesn't go away. Anyone who tells you it does is lying. But you're still here, running this store, doing what needs doing. That takes strength most folks don't have." Then he was gone, the bell chiming behind him, leaving Olivia standing alone with those unexpected words echoing in her mind. He hadn't told her it would get better. He hadn't suggested she should heal or move on. He'd simply acknowledged what was the loss, the pain, and the sheer stubborn will it took to keep going anyway. Something tight in her chest loosened, just a fraction. Over the following months, Lucas Quinn became her most reliable customer. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, he'd arrive with his empty crate and leave with it full. Their conversations remained brief and practical, focused on supplies and weather, and the challenges of coaxing gold from stubborn Nevada ground. He never pried into her life, never asked personal questions, never looked at her with anything other than straightforward respect. And somehow, gradually, Olivia found herself looking forward to his visits in a way that both confused and frightened her. It was during one particularly hot afternoon in July of 1884, nearly 9 months after Thomas's death, that things shifted. Olivia was struggling to move a barrel of flour that had just been delivered when Lucas arrived. Without asking, he simply set down his hat and rolled the barrel into position for her. "You should have someone helping you with the heavy work," he said, brushing flour dust from his hands. "Can't afford to hire anyone." The admission came out more honestly than she'd intended. Business had been steady but not profitable, and she was barely keeping ahead of her debts. Lucas studied her for a moment, and she could see him thinking something through. Finally, he said, "My claim's not producing like I'd hoped. Been thinking about looking for work closer to town anyway. I could help out here a few days a week if you're willing. Wouldn't need much pay, maybe just credit toward supplies and one hot meal a day." "I'm not a charity case, Mr. Quinn." "No, madam, you're not. And I'm not offering charity. I'm offering honest work for honest pay. This store needs help, and I need steadier income than that claim is providing. Seems like a practical arrangement to me. Olivia wanted to refuse. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging she couldn't manage alone. But the truth was, she couldn't manage alone. The heavy work was taking its toll, and there were repairs needed that she didn't have the skill or strength to handle. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. 3 days a week, she said finally, and I'll pay you $2 a week plus meals, no credit. If you're working, you deserve real wages. A smile touched the corner of his mouth, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Yes, madam. When do I start? Tomorrow, if you're available. He extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Olivia shook it. His grip was firm and warm, his palm rough with calluses. It was the most sustained physical contact she'd had with another person since Thomas died, and it sent an unexpected jolt through her, not romantic, exactly, but a sudden awareness that she was still alive, still capable of sensation beyond the numbing grief that had wrapped around her like a shroud. Working alongside Lucas Quinn proved easier than Olivia had anticipated. He arrived each morning at dawn, worked steadily until evening, and never complained or overstepped. He repaired the sagging porch steps, fixed the leak in the storeroom roof, and reorganized the heavy supplies so she could reach everything safely. He was efficient, capable, and blessedly silent when silence was what she needed. But as weeks turned to months, small conversations began to emerge. While eating the simple meals she prepared, stew, cornbread, beans, they talked about practical things at first. The best routes to Virginia City for restocking, which miners were reliable customers, and which bought on credit they'd never repay. The rumors of silver strikes in the hills that might bring more people to Goldfield. Then, slowly, the conversations deepened. Lucas mentioned he'd come from Kansas, where his family had a ranch. His father had died when he was 17, and his older brother had taken over the operation. Lucas had stayed long enough to see his mother remarried to a decent man, then headed west seeking his own fortune. Haven't found it yet, he admitted one evening in September, leaning against the porch railing as the sun set over the Nevada desert. But I keep looking. Do you miss Kansas? Olivia asked. They were sitting outside to catch the evening breeze, both exhausted from a busy day of serving miners who'd struck a productive vein nearby. Sometimes. Mostly, I miss having family around. But a man's got to make his own way, and there wasn't room for me on that ranch. My brother's got 4 sons already. They'll inherit. So you came here alone. Seemed better than staying where I wasn't needed. He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful in the fading light. What about you? Were you born in Nevada? It was the first truly personal question he'd asked, and Olivia found herself answering despite her usual reluctance. Pennsylvania, originally. My parents died of fever when I was 16. I had an aunt in California who agreed to take me in, so I traveled west with a wagon train. Met Thomas when we stopped in Goldfield for supplies. He was helping his father run the store. She paused, old memories surfacing. He asked me to stay, said he'd never met anyone like me, that I was strong and smart and everything he'd ever wanted. I thought it was fate, you know. That I'd lost my parents but found something better. And then you lost that too. Yes. The word came out flat, emotionless. Seems like God enjoys taking things from me. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, gentle. I don't claim to understand God's ways. Lost my father too sudden, and that never made sense to me either. But I learned something from it. We can't control what gets taken from us. Only thing we control is whether we let it destroy us or make us stronger. What if I don't want to be stronger? What if I'm tired of fighting? Then you stop. That's always an option. He turned to face her fully, his eyes serious. "But here's the thing, Olivia, your story's not over. It only ends if you choose to stop, and from what I've seen, you're not the stopping kind." The words hit her like cold water. Your story's not over. It only ends if you choose to stop. She'd been so certain that her life had effectively ended that October night, that everything afterward was just going through motions. But Lucas was suggesting something different, that she had a choice, that there could be chapters yet unwritten if she was willing to turn the page. "I don't know how to start again," she whispered, the admission costing her more than she'd expected. "You already have. You just haven't noticed yet." Over the following weeks, Olivia found herself thinking about Lucas's words constantly. She began paying attention to small details. She'd been ignoring the way autumn light slanted through the store windows, the taste of fresh coffee in the morning, the satisfaction of a well-organized inventory. Small things, ordinary things, but things that suggested life continuing despite her grief. She also began noticing Lucas himself in ways that made her deeply uncomfortable. The way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he lifted heavy crates, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the patience he showed with difficult customers, the kindness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. These observations felt like betrayal, like she was dishonoring Thomas's memory by finding another man attractive. One evening in late October, almost exactly a year after Thomas's death, she mentioned this to Lucas. They were closing the store together, a routine they'd fallen into, and the anniversary had been weighing on her all day. "You think it's wrong?" she asked abruptly. "To notice that life is still happening, to feel things besides grief." Lucas set down the broom he'd been using. "Wrong how? Thomas has only been gone a year. Sometimes I feel guilty that I don't think about him every moment anymore, like I'm forgetting him." "Are you forgetting him?" "No. But the pain isn't as sharp as it was, and I don't know if that's healing or betrayal." Lucas moved closer, though he maintained a respectful distance. "Olivia, loving someone doesn't mean staying frozen at the moment you lost them. Thomas wouldn't have wanted you to stop living. No good man would." "How do you know what he would have wanted?" "Because any man who loved you enough to marry you would want you to be happy. That's what love is, wanting the best for someone even when you can't be there to give it to them." Tears stung her eyes, the first she'd shed in months. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of forgetting what we had, of moving forward and losing the past completely, of opening my heart again and having it destroyed." She wiped her eyes roughly. "I don't think I could survive that kind of loss twice." Lucas took a careful step closer. "You won't forget. What you and Thomas had, that's part of you now. It's shaped who you are. Moving forward doesn't erase the past, it just adds new chapters to your story." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, more vulnerable. "And for what it's worth, I'd never want you to forget him. He was your husband. He'll always matter. But that doesn't mean there's no room for anything else." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest, caught between fear and something that felt dangerously like hope. "Lucas, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for promises or decisions. I just want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." That night, alone in the small room behind the store where she'd slept since Thomas's death, Olivia lay awake staring at the ceiling. Lucas's words echoed in her mind alongside the memories of Thomas, his laughter, his dreams for their future, the way he'd held her close and promised they'd build a good life together. She'd loved Thomas deeply, truly, and his death had shattered something fundamental inside her. But Lucas was right about one thing: Thomas wouldn't have wanted her to stop living. He'd been a generous man, full of hope and plans and determination to make the best of whatever life brought. He would have grieved for her suffering, would have hated knowing she'd spent months merely existing instead of truly living. And slowly, painfully, Olivia began to understand that honoring his memory didn't require remaining trapped in grief forever. It meant taking the strength he'd seen in her, the strength he'd loved, and using it to build a new life not as a replacement for what they'd shared, but as a continuation of the resilience they'd both possessed. The shift wasn't sudden. Olivia didn't wake up one morning having decided to move on. Instead, over the following weeks, she found herself allowing small changes. She smiled at customers more genuinely. She took pride in the store's success rather than just mechanically maintaining it. She started planning for the future, maybe expanding the inventory, maybe adding a small cafe section where miners could get hot meals, maybe even hiring additional help as business grew. And she allowed herself to notice Lucas not with guilt, but with cautious curiosity. She observed how other women in town looked at him with interest, how he politely deflected their attention, how his eyes always found her first whenever he entered a room. She noticed how careful he was never to presume anything, never to push, always giving her space to decide her own path forward. December brought cold winds sweeping down from the mountains, and with them, unexpected trouble. A group of miners who'd had a claim go bust came into the store demanding supplies on credit they had no ability to repay. Olivia, experienced now in the ways of Goldfield's rougher elements, firmly refused. "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I can't extend credit without collateral. You know that's my policy." The largest of the three, a man named Briggs with a scar running down his cheek, leaned across the counter menacingly. "Now, Mrs. Zimmerman, that don't seem very Christian of you. We're just asking for a little help until our luck turns. I run a business, not a charity. If I gave credit to everyone whose luck went bad, I'd be bankrupt inside a month. Maybe you need someone to explain things better." Briggs reached across the counter, grabbing her wrist. Before Olivia could react, Lucas emerged from the storeroom. He'd been working in back, organizing new inventory, and his appearance was so sudden and commanding that Briggs actually released her and stepped back. "I think the lady's been clear," Lucas said, his voice deadly calm. "Time for you gentlemen to leave. This ain't your concern, Quinn." "Anything involving this store is my concern. Now you can walk out that door on your own, or I can help you. Your choice." The tension stretched thin and dangerous. Olivia held her breath, afraid violence would erupt, afraid she was about to witness another man being hurt because of her. But Lucas stood utterly still, his eyes never leaving Briggs, and something in his steady, unflinching gaze must have communicated how seriously he meant his threat. "This ain't worth the trouble," one of the other miners muttered. "Come on, Briggs. We'll get supplies in Tanapa." After they left, Olivia discovered she was shaking. Lucas gently guided her to a chair, then locked the front door and flipped the closed sign despite it being mid-afternoon. "You all right?" he asked, crouching beside her chair so their eyes were level. "I'm fine. Just rattled." That's not the first time someone's gotten aggressive about credit, but usually they back down quicker. Briggs is trouble. He's got a reputation for violence over in the Montezuma district. If he comes back, you send someone for the sheriff immediately. Don't try to handle him yourself. I can't run my business in fear. I'm not suggesting you do, but there's a difference between being strong and being foolish. Men like Briggs don't respect boundaries or decency. They only understand force. Olivia looked at Lucas's concerned face, at the protective set of his shoulders, and felt something inside her chest crack open completely. This man had walked into her store months ago, had quietly and patiently worked his way into her life, had asked nothing and given everything, and now stood ready to defend her without hesitation or expectation of reward. Thomas had been kind and loving, but Lucas was something different, steady, unshakable, a rock against which storms could crash without effect. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for everything." "Always," he replied simply, and the single word contained depths of meaning she wasn't quite ready to explore. That evening, after they'd reopened the store and dealt with the remaining customers, Lucas prepared to head back to his boarding house as usual. But at the door, he paused. "Olivia, I need to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it." He turned to face her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "I know you're still healing. I know you might never be ready for anything more than friendship, and if that's the case, I'll accept it and be grateful for what we have. But I care about you. Not as a business partner or a friend, though you're both those things. I care about you as a woman I admire, respect, and have come to love. And I needed you to know that, even if you can't return the feeling." Olivia's breath caught. She'd known, on some level, that Lucas's feelings ran deeper than simple friendship. But hearing him say it so plainly, with such vulnerable honesty, shook something loose inside her. "Lucas, she faltered, unsure what to say. "I don't know if I'm ready." "Then don't be ready. Just be honest with yourself about what you feel and give yourself permission to feel it without guilt." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. "Your story isn't over, Olivia. It only ends if you choose to stop. And I think you're too strong, too stubborn, and too full of life to choose that ending." He left before she could respond, the bell chiming softly behind him. Olivia stood in the empty store, her hand pressed to the cheek he'd touched, and finally admitted to herself what she'd been denying for months. She had feelings for Lucas Quinn. Real, complicated, terrifying feelings that both honored her past and reached toward a possible future. The question was whether she was brave enough to act on them. Christmas came to Goldfield with limited fanfare. The town strung some decorations, and the saloon hosted a dance, but the holiday felt muted in the harsh Nevada winter. Olivia prepared a special meal: roast chicken, potatoes, and apple pie made from carefully hoarded supplies, and invited Lucas to join her. It was just the two of them in the small living space behind the store, but the warmth of the fire and the companionship made it feel almost festive. "This is the best meal I've had in years," Lucas said, accepting a second piece of pie. "You're a fine cook. My mother taught me. She said a woman should be able to feed her family properly, no matter how tight money gets." Olivia paused, old memories surfacing. She was a practical woman. "Would have liked you, I think." "Would she? You're hardworking, honest, and you don't complain." Those were her main criteria for judging character. Olivia smiled slightly. Thomas was the same way. He always said the measure of a man was how he handled difficulty, not how he celebrated success. Instead of looking uncomfortable at the mention of Thomas, Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was. And he'd have been grateful to you for helping me keep this store running. It was his family's legacy, and I was terrified I'd lose it after he died." She met Lucas's eyes across the table. "You saved that legacy, Lucas. You saved me in a way, though I didn't want to admit I needed saving. We saved each other, maybe. I was pretty lost when I came to Goldfield. Had no direction, no purpose beyond scratching at the ground hoping for gold. Working here, being part of something useful that gave me purpose again." The conversation drifted to other topics, but later, as they sat by the fire with coffee, Olivia found herself thinking about the future in concrete terms for the first time since Thomas's death. The store was doing well now, profitable enough that she could make real plans. And having Lucas there, solid and dependable, made those plans feel possible rather than pipe dreams. "What do you want, Lucas?" she asked suddenly. "Long term, I mean. What are you working toward?" He considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I want what my father had before he died, a piece of land, a home, family, something stable and lasting. The wandering life gets old after a while." He glanced at her. "What about you? What do you want?" "I thought I wanted to disappear," Olivia admitted. "For months after Thomas died, I just wanted to stop existing. But now I want to live again. Really live, not just go through motions. I want to make this store thrive. I want to be part of a community. And I want," she hesitated, then pushed forward. "I want to believe that loving someone and losing them doesn't mean never loving again." "It doesn't," Lucas said quietly. "Loss is part of life, Olivia. It's the price we pay for connection, but that doesn't mean we should stop connecting. It means we should treasure it while we have it." She looked at him, then really looked, seeing not just the steady, reliable man who'd helped save her business, but the person beneath. Someone who'd also known loss, who'd also left pieces of himself scattered across his past, who'd chosen to keep going despite the pain. Someone who understood that moving forward didn't mean forgetting, that building a new life didn't dishonor the old one. "I think I'm ready," she whispered. "Ready for what?" "To turn the page, to start a new chapter." She stood, moved to where he sat, and did something she hadn't imagined herself capable of months ago. She reached for him. "I think I'm ready to see where this story goes." Lucas rose, taking her hands in his. "You're sure?" "I don't want you to rush into anything because of gratitude or loneliness." Or she cut him off by standing on her toes and kissing him. It was brief, tentative, testing waters she hadn't swum in for over a year. But the moment their lips met, something settled into place inside her, not forgetting Thomas, not replacing what they'd had, but acknowledging that her heart was still beating, still capable of connection, still able to reach out toward another human being and hope for reciprocation. When she pulled back, Lucas's eyes held wonder and caution in equal measure. "Olivia, I love Thomas," she said firmly. "I'll always love him, and I'll always grieve what we lost. But you were right, my story isn't over, and I don't want to write the next chapters alone." She squeezed his hands. "If you're willing to be patient with me, to understand that some days will be harder than others, to accept that I come with scars and grief and complicated history, then yes, I want to see where this goes." "I'm willing," he said simply. Then he smiled, truly smiled, and pulled her into his arms. They stood there by the fire, holding each other, and Olivia felt something she'd been convinced was dead forever: hope. The courtship that followed was gentle and gradual. Lucas continued working at the store but started joining Olivia for dinner regularly. They took walks through Goldfield's dusty streets, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Kansas, about his father's death, and the guilt he'd felt leaving his mother behind. She told him about her parents, about the wagon train west, about how Thomas had courted her with quiet determination, until she'd agreed to stay in Nevada and build a life with him. "You think he'd approve?" Lucas asked one evening as they stood outside the store, watching the sun set over the desert. "Thomas, I mean, of us." Olivia had thought about this question many times. "I think he'd be glad I'm happy. He was never possessive or jealous. He wanted me to live fully." She leaned against Lucas's shoulder. "And I think he'd like you. You're both cut from similar cloth, hardworking, honest, practical." I'm honored by the comparison. As winter gave way to spring of 1885, their relationship deepened naturally. Lucas moved from his boarding house into a room Olivia had prepared in the building adjacent to the store, officially becoming not just an employee but a partner in the business. They discussed expansion plans, debated inventory choices, and worked side by side with an ease that suggested years of partnership rather than months. And slowly, carefully, their physical relationship evolved. It started with held hands, then brief kisses, then longer embraces. Olivia was surprised by how natural it felt, how right. There was no sense of betraying Thomas, only a growing connection with Lucas that felt inevitable and honest. She was falling in love again, and while it was different from what she'd felt for Thomas, more cautious, more aware of how quickly happiness could be stolen, it was real and deep and precious. One evening in May, as they closed the store together, Lucas took her hands and said, "Olivia, I need to ask you something." Her heart jumped. "All right. I love you. I've loved you for months now, probably since those early days when I'd watch you push through grief to serve customers with dignity and strength. And I want to build a life with you not as your employee or your friend, but as your husband." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "I know you might need more time. I know this might feel too soon, but I wanted you to know my intentions are serious and lasting. Will you marry me?" Olivia looked at the ring, then at Lucas's earnest face and felt tears gathering. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "I loved Thomas so much, and losing him nearly destroyed me. I'm terrified of going through that again." "I can't promise you won't lose me," Lucas said honestly. "None of us know how much time we have. But I can promise that whatever time we do have, I'll spend it loving you and working to make you happy. And I think that's worth the risk, don't you?" She thought about the past year, the numbness, the grief, the slow, painful journey back to feeling alive. She thought about how Lucas had been there for every step, patient and steady, asking nothing but offering everything. She thought about Thomas and what he would say if he could speak to her now. He'd tell her to live, she knew. He'd tell her to grab happiness where she found it and hold on tight. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Lucas's face lit up with joy, and he slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. They stood there in the store where they'd spent so many hours working side by side, and Olivia felt the future opening up before her, not as a replacement for what she'd lost, but as a new chapter in a story that refused to end. They married in June in a simple ceremony at Goldfield's small church. The town turned out in surprising numbers, miners and merchants and families who'd come to appreciate Olivia's fair dealing and Lucas's steady presence. Olivia wore a simple blue dress rather than white, feeling that white didn't suit a second marriage to a widow. Lucas wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, and he couldn't stop smiling when the preacher asked if she took Lucas Quinn to be her lawfully wedded husband. Olivia's voice rang out clear and certain. "I do." The reception was held at the saloon, which the owner had agreed to close for the afternoon. There was fiddle music and dancing and more food than Goldfield usually saw at once. Olivia found herself laughing, actually laughing, as Lucas spun her around the makeshift dance floor with more enthusiasm than skill. "I should have mentioned I'm not much of a dancer," he said, narrowly avoiding stepping on her feet. "I don't care. This is perfect." And she meant it. Not perfect in some idealized way, but perfectly real, perfectly honest, perfectly them. That night, as they lay together in the small house, Lucas had purchased just outside town a wedding gift to them. Both Olivia felt peace settle over her like a blanket. She'd survived something she thought would kill her. She'd learned that love wasn't a finite resource, that opening your heart again didn't diminish what came before. She discovered that her story wasn't over, that there were chapters yet to be written if she was brave enough to pick up the pen. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked, his arm around her shoulders. "That I'm happy, and that I'd forgotten what that felt like." She turned to face him. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I'd given up on myself. You never gave up, he corrected. You just needed someone to remind you that your story only ends if you choose to stop, and you chose to keep going. Life in Goldfield settled into a comfortable rhythm. Olivia and Lucas ran the store together, their partnership both professional and personal proving remarkably successful. They expanded the inventory, added the cafe section Olivia had dreamed about, and hired a young man to help with the heavy work. The business thrived, and with it, so did they. In the spring of 1886, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She'd wanted children with Thomas, had dreamed of them, but that dream had died with him. Now it was resurrecting, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked Lucas one night, her hand on her still flat stomach. "What if I lose this baby, or something happens during the birth? Or, then we'll face it together," Lucas interrupted gently. "Olivia, I know you're scared, but you can't live your life preparing for disaster. Sometimes you just have to trust that things will work out. That's hard for me now." "I know, but I'll carry the hope for both of us when you can't manage it yourself. That's what we do for each other." His faith proved warranted. In December of 1886, Olivia gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Thomas Lucas Quinn, honoring both the past and the present. Holding her son for the first time, Olivia wept with emotions too complex to name. Grief for the child she'd never had with Thomas. Joy for this new life she'd created with Lucas. Gratitude for survival and second chances and the stubborn resilience of the human heart. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, his finger gently touching their son's tiny hand. "You did amazingly." As their son grew, Olivia found herself reflecting often on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the young woman who'd lost her parents and traveled west seeking a new life. The bride who'd married Thomas full of hope and dreams. The widow who'd stood at a graveside wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. The woman who'd met a quiet cowboy and slowly, painfully, learned to love again. Her story could have ended that October night in 1883. She could have let grief consume her, could have stopped living in any meaningful way, could have simply existed until time released her from the obligation of breathing. But Lucas had been right, her story only ended if she chose to stop, and she'd chosen, eventually, to keep going, to turn the page, to see what came next. In 1888, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, and their family felt complete. The store continued to prosper, and Lucas eventually bought the land adjacent to their house, turning it into a small ranch where they raised cattle and horses. It wasn't the mining fortune he'd originally sought in Nevada, but it was something better: a real home, a family, a life built on honest work and mutual love. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Olivia with a trip to Virginia City. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and spent 2 days exploring the larger town, eating in restaurants, attending a theater performance, and simply enjoying each other's company without the demands of business and parenthood. On their last evening, they stood on a balcony overlooking the bustling streets, and Lucas pulled Olivia close. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About what?" "Choosing to keep your story going. Marrying me. This life we've built." Olivia considered the question seriously. She still thought about Thomas sometimes, still felt the echo of that loss. She still had days when grief caught her unexpectedly, when she remembered what might have been. But those moments no longer defined her existence. They were part of her story, certainly, but not the end of it. "No regrets," she said finally. "This isn't the life I imagined when I was 20, but it's a good life, Lucas. A really good life, and I'm grateful for every day of it. Even the hard days, especially the hard days. They taught me I'm stronger than I thought." that I can survive losing everything and still find reasons to keep going." She turned to face him. "You gave me that gift, you know. When you told me my story only ends if I choose to stop, you gave me permission to live again. I'll never forget that." "You gave yourself that gift," Lucas corrected. "I just reminded you it was there." They returned to Goldfield refreshed and reconnected, ready to face whatever came next. And what came was more than they'd anticipated. By 1890, Goldfield was booming. New silver strikes brought floods of prospectors, and the town grew from a dusty mining camp to a proper settlement with schools, churches, and even plans for a railroad spur. The store became one of the most successful businesses in the region, and Lucas's ranch supplied beef to the growing population. Their children thrived. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved both books and horses equally. Margaret was fearless and determined, climbing trees and pestering her father to teach her to rope cattle. Watching them, Olivia felt profound gratitude for the life she'd rebuilt from the ashes of her first marriage. She and Lucas established a comfortable rhythm of partnership and romance, working together during the day and enjoying quiet evenings together after the children were asleep. They still disagreed sometimes. Lucas tended toward optimism while Olivia remained cautious, and they had different ideas about business expansion, but they'd learned to navigate conflict with respect and compromise. "You balance me," Lucas told her once. "Your caution keeps my optimism from becoming recklessness. And your hope keeps my caution from becoming paralysis," Olivia replied. In 1892, nearly 10 years after Thomas's death and 7 years after her marriage to Lucas, Olivia did something she'd been planning for months. She visited Thomas's grave for the first time since remarrying. She'd avoided it, feeling conflicted and guilty, but she finally acknowledged that she needed closure in a way she hadn't yet achieved. Lucas offered to come with her, but she went alone, carrying wildflowers she'd picked from their property. Standing at the weathered headstone, she felt the old grief rise up, still painful but no longer consuming. "I'm sorry I haven't visited," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure what to say or if you'd understand the choices I've made, but I think you would understand. You were always generous, always wanted me to be happy." She placed the flowers carefully. "I loved you, Thomas. I still do in a way. What we had was real and precious, and losing you nearly destroyed me. But Lucas helped me find my way back to living. He loves me and I love him, and we've built a good life together. I have children now, Thomas, a son we named after you. I think you'd like that." The wind rustled through the desert scrub, and Olivia imagined it was Thomas giving his blessing. Whether that was real or just her need for closure, she couldn't say. But standing there, she felt the last pieces of her guilt fall away. She had honored Thomas by surviving, by taking the strength he'd seen in her, and using it to build a new life. She had honored him by loving again, by showing that what they'd shared was so good it had taught her love was worth the risk of loss. "Thank you," she whispered, "for loving me, for being part of my story, and for whatever part of you lives on in our son, in my memories, in the woman I became because of knowing you." She walked back to where Lucas waited with the wagon, and he took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms. "All right?" he asked. "Better than all right. I think I'm finally at peace with all of it, the past, the present, the future." "Good, because I have news that's going to affect that future." He smiled, looking both excited and nervous. "I've been offered a position on the town council. They want me to help plan Goldfield's expansion, work on bringing in the railroad, that sort of thing. It would mean more responsibility and less time at the store." "What do you want to do?" "I want to say yes, but only if you're comfortable with it. We built this life together, Olivia. I won't make major decisions without you." She thought about the young widow who'd barely been able to face each day, who'd been so consumed by grief that making any decision felt impossible. Then she thought about who she'd become: a successful businesswoman, a mother, a partner in a marriage built on equality and mutual respect. That woman could handle running the store with additional hired help while her husband served their community. "Say yes," she told him. "This is a good opportunity and you'll be excellent at it. We'll figure out the details together." And they did. Over the following years, they navigated the challenges of Lucas's new responsibilities, hired competent people to help run the store and ranch, and continued building their life together. 2 more children joined their family, a second daughter in 1894 and another son in 1896. Their home rang with laughter and arguments and all the messy, beautiful chaos of a large family. Lucas proved an effective council member, helping guide Goldfield's transformation from rough mining camp to respectable town. He advocated for schools and churches, pushed for law enforcement that actually protected citizens rather than just maintaining order, and worked tirelessly to attract businesses that would provide stability beyond the boom and bust cycle of mining. Olivia, meanwhile, became a pillar of the community in her own right. She started a women's association that raised funds for various civic improvements, mentored young women arriving in Goldfield seeking opportunities, and eventually wrote a series of articles for the local newspaper about running a business in the West. Her story, though she never mentioned the darkest parts, inspired other women to believe they could survive hardship and build meaningful lives. By 1900, 17 years after Thomas's death and 15 years after her marriage to Lucas, Olivia stood in the expanded store, now taking up 3 buildings and employing a dozen people, and marveled at how far she'd come. The frightened, grieving widow who'd barely been able to function was gone, replaced by a confident woman who'd built something lasting and valuable. "Mother, the suppliers are here with the new fabric you ordered," Thomas called from the loading area. At 13, he was already tall and capable, showing signs of becoming as steady and reliable as the man he was named for and the man raising him. "I'll be right there." But Olivia paused for a moment, looking around the bustling store. This place had been her salvation and her trial, the thing that kept her going when she wanted to quit. And now it was thriving beyond anything she'd imagined. That evening, after the children were in bed, Olivia and Lucas sat on their porch watching the sunset. It was a ritual they'd maintained through the years, this quiet time together at day's end. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, taking her hand. "Everything. Nothing. How strange life is." She squeezed his fingers. 17 years ago, I was standing at a grave thinking my life was over. And now look at us, 4 children, successful businesses, respect in the community, a marriage I treasure more with every passing year. How did we get here? One day at a time, Lucas said simply. One choice at a time. You chose to keep going when stopping would have been easier. That's how we got here. We got here, she corrected. Not me. You were the one who told me my story only ends if I choose to stop. And you were the one brave enough to believe it. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the Nevada sky turn brilliant shades of orange and purple. Olivia thought about stories, how they begin, how they progress, how they end. Her story had nearly ended in tragedy, a tale of love and loss and unrelenting grief. But because she'd chosen to keep turning pages, because Lucas had shown her that ending was a choice rather than an inevitability, it had become something different. A story of resilience and second chances, of love proving stronger than loss, of a woman who'd been broken and found a way to heal. In 1902, their eldest daughter Margaret married a young rancher from the neighboring county. and Olivia found herself in the unexpected position of mother of the bride. Watching Margaret stand at the altar, radiant with happiness, Olivia remembered her own 2 weddings, the first full of innocent hope, the second tempered by experience but no less meaningful. "She's beautiful," Lucas whispered, standing beside Olivia during the ceremony. "She is. And she's strong enough to handle whatever life brings. We made sure of that." After the wedding, during the reception, Margaret pulled Olivia aside. "Thank you, Mother, for everything, for showing me that women can be strong and independent and still choose love, for teaching me that life keeps going even after loss, for being the example I needed." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "You're going to have a wonderful life, Margaret. Just remember, your story only ends if you choose to stop. Keep choosing to go forward, no matter what challenges come." "I will. You taught me that." As the years continued their steady march, Olivia and Lucas aged together gracefully. Their children grew and started lives of their own. Thomas took over management of the store, showing the same fair dealing and practical wisdom that had made it successful. Their other children pursued their own paths. Margaret and her rancher husband had a spread 50 miles south. Their second daughter became a teacher in Virginia City. Their youngest son showed promise as a lawyer. In 1910, Lucas and Olivia celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a large party attended by what seemed like half of Nevada. They'd become fixtures in Goldfield, respected elders whose story was part of the town's history. People still talked about how Mrs. Quinn had kept her store running after her first husband's murder, how Mr. Quinn had helped build Goldfield into a prosperous town, how their marriage was proof that second chances could be as precious as first ones. During the party, Lucas gave a speech that had Olivia wiping away tears. 25 years ago, I married the strongest woman I've ever known. She'd been through tragedy that would have destroyed most people, but she kept going, kept building, kept hoping, kept choosing life over surrender. And she let me be part of that journey, which is the greatest honor of my life. I love you, Olivia. I've loved you from the start, and I'll love you until my last breath. And beyond, Olivia added, standing to kiss him while their guests cheered. Love doesn't end with death, Lucas. What we have will last forever. As Olivia moved through her 60s, she found herself reflecting more often on the choices that had shaped her life. She thought about the young woman who'd lost her parents and traveled west, seeking a new beginning. The bride who'd found love in a dusty Nevada mining camp. The widow who'd nearly let grief consume her completely. The woman who'd met a steady, patient cowboy and slowly learned to love again. The mother who'd raised children to be strong and independent. The businesswoman who'd built something lasting. The wife who'd found that second love could be just as deep and true as first love, just different in its expression. One afternoon in the summer of 1912, she and Lucas were sitting in their usual spot on the porch when he said, "You ever regret it? Staying in Goldfield after Thomas died? You could have sold the store and gone back east, started completely fresh." Olivia considered the question seriously. No, leaving would have felt like running away, like letting those outlaws win by destroying everything Thomas and I had built. Staying was hard, but it was the right choice. It led to you, to our family, to this life. How could I regret that? I'm glad you stayed. Glad you chose to keep your story going. So am I. She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable in a way that only came from decades of partnership. You know what I tell young women now when they come to me after tragedy or hardship? What? I tell them that their story only ends if they choose to stop, that they have more strength than they realize. That loss is part of life, but it doesn't have to be the end of life. And that choosing to keep going isn't betraying what they've lost, it's honoring it, by showing that love was strong enough to give them courage to face whatever comes next. Wise words. I learned them from a cowboy who walked into my store 29 years ago and refused to give up on me even when I'd given up on myself. Lucas laughed, the sound warm and familiar. I think you're romanticizing history a bit. I was just a man who needed supplies and found the most remarkable woman I'd ever met running the store. Remarkable. I was a mess. You were surviving, which made you remarkable. The rest just took time. They sat together as the sun set over the Nevada desert they'd called home for so long. Two people who'd found each other at the right moment and built a life that honored both their pasts and their present. Around them, the town of Goldfield bustled with activity so different from the rough mining camp it had been when Olivia first arrived in 1882. But change was inevitable, Olivia had learned. What mattered was how you adapted to it, how you chose to keep writing your story even when tragedy tried to write the ending for you. In 1915, Lucas suffered a heart attack. He survived, but it weakened him considerably, and he was forced to retire from most of his business and civic activities. Olivia, now 68 and remarkably healthy herself, became his caretaker, reversing the roles they'd held for so long. "I don't like being useless," Lucas grumbled one afternoon as Olivia helped him into bed for his mandatory rest. "You're not useless. You're healing. There's a difference. I'm supposed to be taking care of you, not the other way around." Olivia sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. "Lucas, do you remember what you told me all those years ago? That in marriage, we carry hope for each other when one of us can't manage it. Well, now I'm carrying the strength for both of us. That's what we do." He smiled, though his face showed the weariness of illness. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." Lucas recovered slowly, never quite regaining his former vitality, but achieving a comfortable if reduced level of activity. They spent more time at home, enjoying visits from their children and grandchildren, who now numbered 11. Olivia delighted in the grandchildren, seeing in them echoes of both her marriage's Thomas's kind eyes in one grandson, Lucas's steady temperament in a granddaughter, her own stubborn determination scattered throughout. One evening, holding their youngest grandchild Margaret's third daughter, Olivia felt the completion of a circle she'd begun decades ago. This baby bore the middle name Olivia in her honor, and the thought that she'd influenced this family enough to be remembered in such a way filled her with profound gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked from his chair by the fire. "That I've had a good life." "Better than I deserved, probably." "You deserved every bit of happiness you found," Lucas corrected firmly. "Don't diminish what you earned through sheer determination and courage." "We earned it," she said, "together." In the spring of 1918, as war raged in Europe and the world seemed to be tearing itself apart, Olivia and Lucas celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary quietly at home. Lucas's health had declined further, and they both understood, without saying it explicitly, that their time together was growing short. "Any regrets?" Olivia asked, echoing the question Lucas had posed years ago on their 5th anniversary. "Only that I didn't have more time," Lucas replied honestly. "I'd have liked 50 years with you instead of 33, but I can't complain. What we had was real and precious and exactly what I needed." "What we had," Olivia's voice caught. "Lucas, don't pretend, Olivia. We both know I'm not getting better, and that's all right. I've lived a good life, loved a good woman, helped raise wonderful children. I have no complaints." He reached for her hand. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, you keep going. Keep living, keep finding joy, keep writing your story. It only ends if you choose to stop, remember." Tears streamed down Olivia's face. "I'm 71 years old, Lucas. How much story can be left? as much as you choose to write. You're strong, Olivia, stronger than you know. You'll grieve, I know that, and I wouldn't want you not to. But don't let grief be the final chapter. There's more to come if you're brave enough to see it. Lucas Quinn died peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later, surrounded by family. Olivia held his hand as he took his last breath, and the grief that swept through her was familiar but different from what she'd felt losing Thomas. That had been sharp and sudden, a violent tearing away. This was sad but gentle, a natural conclusion to a life well lived, and a marriage that had given them both exactly what they needed. At the funeral, their children and grandchildren gathered around Olivia, offering comfort and support. She accepted it gratefully, but didn't crumble the way she had after Thomas's death. She was older now, more experienced with loss, more aware that grief was part of love's price. And she had Lucas's final words to sustain her. Her story only ended if she chose to stop. In the weeks and months that followed, Olivia did grieve. She felt Lucas's absence keenly, missed his steady presence and quiet wisdom. But she also kept living, kept engaging with her family, kept taking walks through Goldfield and appreciating the town they'd helped build. She attended church, participated in community events, and spent hours with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the life they'd built together. One afternoon, her eldest son Thomas found her standing at Lucas's grave, much as she'd stood at his namesake's grave decades earlier. "You all right, Mother?" he asked gently. "I'm sad, but I'm all right." She touched the headstone. "He gave me so much, Thomas. Not just a life and a family, but permission to live after I'd wanted to die. He showed me that my story didn't have to end just because I'd suffered tragedy. He loved you very much, and I loved him, still do." She turned to her son. "You know what's strange? I've loved 2 men deeply in my life, and I don't love either one less because of the other. Love doesn't work that way. It's not finite or competitive. It just is in all its forms. That's beautiful, Mother. It's true. And it's what I want you and your siblings to remember, that loss is real and grief is valid, but they don't have to be the end of the story. Your father taught me that, both of them in different ways, and I'm teaching it to you now." Olivia Quinn lived another 6 years after Lucas's death, dying peacefully at the age of 77 in 1924. In those final years, she remained active and engaged, a beloved figure in Goldfield who'd witnessed and helped shape the town's entire history. She saw her grandchildren marry and have children of their own, making her a great-grandmother 4 times over. She saw the world change dramatically, automobiles replacing horses, electricity lighting homes that had relied on oil lamps, the horrors of the Great War giving way to the prosperity of the 1920s. But through all the changes, Olivia held onto the central truth Lucas had taught her. Life only ends when you choose to stop. And she never stopped, not until her body simply gave out after 7 decades of stubborn, resilient living. At her funeral, her children spoke about her strength, her wisdom, her unwavering love. But it was her eldest grandson who captured the essence of her life story. "Great-grandmother Olivia taught us that tragedy doesn't have to be the end," he said. "She lost her first husband violently and it nearly destroyed her. But she chose to keep going. She rebuilt her life, found love again, raised a family, and helped build this community. She showed us all that our stories only end if we choose to stop. And she never stopped, not once, not even when it would have been easier to give up. That's the legacy she leaves us, not wealth or status, but the example of a woman who refused to let loss define her." The family buried Olivia between her 2 husbands in Goldfield Cemetery, her headstone reading simply, "Olivia Zimmerman Quinn, 1847–1924. She chose to keep going." And in that dusty Nevada town she'd called home for over 40 years, her story became legend not because it was extraordinary, but because it was true. A young widow who'd thought her life was over. A steady cowboy who'd told her it only ended if she chose to stop. Two people who'd found each other at the right moment and built a life that honored both their pasts and their present. Their descendants continued to tell the story for generations, passing down the wisdom that had sustained Olivia through tragedy and triumph. Life only ends when you choose to stop. And as long as you're still breathing, still choosing to face each new day, your story continues. The chapters may be difficult, the plot may twist in unexpected ways, but the story goes on, full of possibility and hope and the stubborn resilience of the human heart. In the end, that was Olivia's greatest gift, not the successful business she'd built or the family she'd raised, but the simple, powerful truth that tragedy doesn't write the final chapter. We do. And as long as we choose to keep turning pages, there's always more story to tell.